Hello, and welcome to the webinar on what role do developers have in application security. I'm Christina Cardoza, news editor of SD Times. Before we get started, I have just a couple of quick housekeeping announcements. First, this webinar will be recorded and available on demand in about 24 hours after the event on the sdtimes.com website. Secondly, instead of doing a live Q&A at the end, we're going to be taking questions from listeners throughout the webinar. So if you have any questions at any time, please submit them using the Control Panel's Questions tab. Joining me today are Cody Bertram and Patrick McNeil, Senior Principal Solution Architects at the security company Veracode. Hey guys, thanks for joining me today.
Hello.
Thank you for having us.
So I think by now everyone gets the importance of security. You know, no one wants to be that next headline that they've been breached, but it's not only about protecting yourself from these future attacks, there's also the aspect of dealing with your backlogs and technical debt, because there could be existing flaws within your solutions that haven't been addressed or that just have been accumulating. So I know in the 10th annual Veracode State of Security Report, you guys found that security debt was an increasing pain point across all industries, and developers are under pressure to fix it faster than they accumulate. So I wanted to start the conversation off here. Why does security technical debt continue to be a problem, and how can we get a handle on this?
Cody, do you want to start on that one? Because I think you're pretty opinionated.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I was a software developer at one point in time in my career, and you know, security was never really a functional requirement that was addressed or mandated, you know, during the development cycles. You know, so we would always be chasing revenue, and you know, all the features and functionality that we were building were revenue supporting, and it meant that, you know, we had to build things that could bring in, you know, that revenue, and you know, everything else just went on the backlog. You know, we'll get to that later. And you know, people who are managing and using backlogs, you know, they understand that there's a certain amount of things that just never, you know, get attention brought back to them. So security is kind of one of those things that, you know, if you're really not allowing yourself to understand the risk that's there, that it may get ignored overall.
Yeah, and I was a developer probably longer ago than Cody was. I came from the security side mostly, and I mean, the security teams are also under pressure right now to do more and more from a security perspective, and to try to keep up. They're trying to push things onto development teams, and you know, it's kind of a cyclical thing. Again, they just keep adding to the backlog, and then when you start you know, trying to you know, add in more tools, it just becomes harder to keep up.
So why bring, you know, developers in on this? Why do you think that they are a good fit, or they're well suited to handle and help out with the security aspect of applications?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. So, you know, I'm kind of a rare or an interesting, you know, person when it comes to, you know, how I got my start in application security. You know, I found my first 2 Unix exploits when I was 13 years old, and you know, I was hooked on security. I never wanted to do anything else, but you know, I soon realized that there was this massive gap in, you know, understanding how to break applications if I didn't know how to build them. So, you know, really, I went into a career as a developer to acquire, you know, that skill. And now, you know, the most capable individuals for addressing security issues are developers, and in most cases they just need to be trained, or you know, put themselves in a scenario where they're thinking a little bit outside the box, as you know, like an evil person you know, may.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Cody, but I know that when I got out of college, you know, my first day as a developer, I basically had to learn an awful lot that college didn't really teach me. You know, like the social aspects of contributing to a larger team, and you know, abiding by somebody else's architectural decisions. But I also found, of course, that what I learned in college didn't necessarily hold up as far as, you know, writing secure code in the real world. And I know that I think most developers, would write more secure code if they actually knew how, and that skill level definitely varies. So I think really the challenge is, building that knowledge through educational opportunities for developers, and not expecting them to learn everything when you point a fire hose of e-learning at them or something, but giving them very focused and explicit, specific things to do and things to watch out for.
Great. And what would you say are some of those, beginning things to do or watch out for? If college isn't addressing the security aspect in detail or as well as developers should understand, how can they continue to learn, continue to improve, and to test out, assess the skill level that they're at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, they really need to be supported by metrics, and going all the way back to the security tech debt aspects, you have to manage to your metrics, and it's easiest to look at the top CWE types, the top vulnerability types that may be getting introduced, and target those with very specific guidance or mentoring or e-learning or something. Um, to burn down just those specific things. However, it can also be effective to set up a security champions program. And I've seen customers have success with, embedding a security champion in a particular program and giving them a checklist. Hey, if you're working on something that has anything to do with authentication, or we're setting up a new microservice or something like that, those are the times when you might want to pull in a security team member, and you'll learn a lot just through that interaction.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I guess I would caution also, if a list of requirements, for security get too long, like always, scrub your inputs and encode your outputs, and then this list just kind of keeps going and going. It's something that if it's too long, didn't read, it could become a challenge. So I also think that leaning in on tools where tools are really good, like a computer is the best tool in your arsenal, to solve things like cross-site scripting or SQL injection. They just are the best at that. But then maybe kind of abstracting yourself from the noise where computers can help with the problem, and then I think it would be really good if people just understood like, what do I need to do from a human perspective? And I guess what I mean by that is, there's a whole classification of security problems where, as an example, if I'm looking at a query string that says, account number equals 123, if I change that to 124, a computer has no way of solving that problem or understanding that, now that I'm looking at somebody else's account information, that's a problem. So we actually have to, think as developers, like, I better make sure that isn't a possibility. Like, check that the person actually has account ownership and should be seeing a record. And so if I limit that list of requirements to what I should really pay attention to as a human, then I can learn how to think about problems and get around them. But then I can also learn rapidly from like tooling. If it's finding all the cross-site scripting vulnerabilities, I can just start knocking those out, and then I just know how to fix, find fix.
Great. Yeah, you guys brought up a lot of good stuff there. I want to start with the security champion, go back to that. I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like sometimes when developers and everyone's now becoming responsible for security, it ends up being like, well, who's responsible for making sure it's a priority, or who's responsible for making sure it happens? So how do you find that security champion? Who are they? What sort of skills do they need to be having, and what do they need to be checking in and that the team is actually doing?
I mean, I think they need to be a more senior developer on the team. It doesn't always have to be the case, but it certainly helps. I have also seen some success with really just identifying the people that have an interest in eventually moving into a security profession as well. I have seen several people move from developer roles onto working for the application security team. So it's really, I think, sometimes just a matter of either a survey or social interaction with the teams to identify people who do have that propensity or desire to move into a security role.
Right, I can imagine it's a
Yeah.
little easier, when you're new to software development, you're learning all of these modern techniques as you're learning to become a software developer. But I'm interested to learn, what is the culture changes for people who are already on the team who maybe didn't have as much experience with security? What are the culture transformations that they have to go with and deal with as security becomes more of the conversation?
Cody, you want to start? I've been taking the lead on most of these.
Um, yeah. So I mean, really, a culture is, I think, about continuous learning. It's I've been in development shops where we reflected upon our sins, learned from those, and continuously became better. And I've also been a part of development shops where you couldn't look behind closed doors, like forget things ever happened. But the continuous learning aspect, always being able to reflect upon what you've done, know that you can actually get better, is probably the most important thing for me. And complexity, in a software system is like probably the worst thing to deal with. Like the bigger a system gets, the harder it is to actually manage that system. It takes more hours to make the smallest of code changes, because it's like a domino effect. And so if you continuously learn from what you have in front of you, continuously allow people to refactor and address the backlog, then it's actually going to be cheaper for you to maintain it in the future. So I encourage developers to be able to it's funny is they know what needs to be done. Like I bet everybody on this call right now has something like, oh man, if my boss just gave me like a week, I would get XYZ done. And those things are actually they're kind of a gift, like those type of thoughts and the way of approaching a problem, learning from it, and continuously improving.
Yeah, I'll definitely echo that. I mean, culture is going to have to come from the top down. I mean, security is going to be under a lot of pressure to deliver secure code. The development teams are as well, but you kind of have to maybe from the ground up remind management that there are three ways of DevOps, and the third way, really is about spotting ways that you can improve the process and iterating, and that includes having time to do security burn downs, to have educational opportunities, focus on ways that you can improve the process going forward. As I was going to bring up the example, I guess one of my customers had the idea of doing a security burn down, and they actually pitched it as almost like a hackathon where they incentivized development teams to install and use some of the security tools that they had at hand, Veracode and even beyond Veracode. So if you installed it in your IDE and you ran a certain number of scans, you got points. If you resolved flaws by certain severities, you got more points. And in the end, the participants really had kind of fun with it. And, they actually saw that there was some real measurable impact for them. So it was, not only a way for them to learn, but also a way for them to get rid of quite a bit of their security debt.
Yeah, that's kind of funny.
What are
Oh,
some ways that
sorry.
you can, sorry, that you can, bring this, make sure that the leadership is aware that security is a priority? In my experience with some of the transformations, the business leaders won't act unless they see that it's an impact on the business or it's going to improve the business. So how do you, show that these security tools, these security plans are bringing value?
Yeah, I think it really, everything's got to be driven by metrics. And if you can start small and onboard, a development team or two or three, and then actually show the difference between, their introduction of flaws beforehand and introduction of flaws afterwards. I mean, that can translate into real dollars because you're not having to go back to, fix code and spend more development cycles. And, you can certainly point to a lot of the, top, visible compromises and breaches that are, in the news and kind of say, hey, look, this high risk issue, highly exploitable. If we were to fall victim to somebody searching for that, that translates directly to risk and revenue.
Yeah, I mean, risk is hard to quantify in terms of dollars. It can be done. Every time I find a command injection vulnerability in an application, I mean, if I can, send a command to that app and the backend web server, runs that command, then that's like the keys to the kingdom, right? And there's all sorts of nefarious actors out there currently doing like ransomware attacks. Like in the mainstream media, we've just read about a bunch of people paying those ransoms. And so I think I just read that somebody shelled out $10 million because somebody got a foothold into their network, planted a ransomware piece of malware. It encrypted all their files, and then they paid up, in order to get the decryption key. And so a command injection being a foothold into a network that would allow somebody to run that type of command, I'm like, that's a $10 million issue. Like it really can be quantified. So that's kind of where I'm at. Like the risk is absolutely real. I mean, people kind of tend to want to sleep at night, so they don't try to think about it all the time. But the fact of the matter is that these are actually really easy things to accidentally do as a developer, unless you're thinking about them.
Mm-hmm.
And so since they're easy to do, it means that there's still millions of these defects out there in the wild, in the world. And hopefully we can make the world a little bit of a better place by, saying that the risk is justified and we really need to do, something about it. And after that, net is that you reduce the complexity of your software systems and it gets easier to maintain and less costly to maintain, as a result of addressing that backlog. So yeah, you can get, cost savings in the form of, breach avoidance and cost savings and your systems being less complex to manage.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to quantify avoiding risk, and I think sometimes, if you're not in sales and you're in a development role, you're maybe cautious about spreading, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Might make you feel a little dirty, but I mean, from a management perspective, they really need to have a direct correlation between, this type of vulnerability has been used elsewhere. This is how much it costs them. Look, we have this exact same thing here and we have X number of them. So you do the math. If we don't fix them, that's what we could be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So in addition to risk, what else can you use for metrics to, improve your application security?
Metrics.
For
Um,
instance, can you like quantify speed, coverage, and accuracy to help with improve your security?
yes, but that's kind of one of those things where you actually have to pick two. You can't actually have all three. This is the real world, and so if you want speed, and accuracy, you're really going to be sacrificing coverage. If you want coverage and speed, you're going to be sacrificing accuracy. Um, you know, so I guess if it were me, I think speed is important in a DevOps world, and we need to be able to react to security, or better yet, plan for security at all stages of development. Feedback loops are great so that those insights can be applied in real time, um, but not at the sacrifice of actually accuracy, or coverage. So
Hmm.
um, yeah, leaving a no stone unturned approach is pretty important, because we're actually dealing with risk, um, and a lot of very important brand names um, associated with that.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
mentioned like planning out security, and we've talked about the requirements and the checklists you need to go through sometimes when you're addressing security in these applications. But what can't you plan for? Do you guys have any experience in something going wrong that you didn't plan for, and how do you address that?
I think there are certainly some architectural things that I've seen gone wrong. There are like third-party open source issues that pop up, and hey, there's no fix for this. Those types of things can go wrong, and then you're in a scramble mode looking for is there a different third-party library that you could use? Is there a way to perhaps mitigate the risk by putting in some sort of compensating control? Um, there a lot of the incident response aspects I think are sometimes overlooked. The what happens when things do go sideways. Um, and I think it is definitely important to have that strong connection between your development team and the security team. And having somebody on the development team, could be the security champion that can be involved in incident response, and that does have to be factored in as a job responsibility so that you're not continually impacting them and their development deliverables.
Yeah, I worry a lot about uh, people just flooding a developer's backlog with a bunch of noise. That doesn't go right. I mean, it goes wrong more often than not. Like, you need to be careful, I think, in what you ask people to address. It's you just
Mhm.
don't open the fire hose, and flood, people. You need to kind of get better about security incrementally, which means maybe you pick one classification of security vulnerability to, address first, and then people actually, learn from that. Because, if you find, 500 issues in an application, um, you know, and dump those on somebody, then there's a chance that nothing gets done.
There's a good chance.
So yeah, incremental progress with one thing also
Yeah.
makes people, excited about, like, okay, we did that. Let's get the next thing,
Yeah.
off our list. And so the last thing I'll say there, is that, I've seen a lot of, cases in my career where, a tool will find just like, hey, I think they're trying to look good or something, like more stuff equals more, it's better. But it's not the case. If you flood people and developers with like low and informational issues, just to look like you find more stuff, you're not actually doing the world really any service. Again, we need to go back to accuracy, and actionable results.
Exactly. Yeah. So that's one of the things that we're constantly running into when we do competitive evaluations is teams that are looking at, well, they found 59 issues and you only found 23. So, theirs is better. And it's like, well, what is the false positive rate? What's the accuracy involved? And then we'll also get questions around speed. And to Cody's earlier point, we start thinking about speed being synonymous with DevOps, and I try to caution people against that. We'll look at, oh, well, DevOps, you need to look at incremental scanning or fast scanning. And while we certainly don't want to hold up any pipelines because we're probably deploying more frequently, fast doesn't necessarily add any value if it's not accurate and you're creating a bunch of false positives that people have to weed through. And it can be a little scary, but if you really take this back to how DevOps is supposed to work, you are supposed to be able to find your issues and put them in the backlog and circle back and work them according to priority. So let your pipeline proceed, run asynchronous scans so you're not breaking the build right away for your security issues. You know what? They've probably been there for a really long time. So by breaking builds and things like that, you're not really helping anybody. So, be calm, go back and work the backlog, and don't worry about breaking the build at first.
Great. Yeah, I think a lot of that addresses some of the questions we're getting from attendees. We keep bringing up this concept of simplicity in development, data, organization management, and they ask, how important is this? What happens when it's, speed versus simplicity? Why keep things simple?
Yeah, and I think some of the reactions from developers is, well, you're making things more complicated for me now because I have to go back and fix things, or the process has to change. And I definitely advocate that when you start your program, you don't immediately go right to the developer's IDE. I like to see teams integrate with the CICD pipeline first and do asynchronous scanning, just so you can uncover where your security debt really lies. And then you can make some priority decisions based on, the application. Is it internal, external facing? Is it revenue producing or not? What's the risk to us if it's compromised? And then you can start moving towards the developers' IDEs. I mean, there will be process changes and tool changes that have to be made. And you can target the ones that are easy, but I caution people against taking the super easy approach, which may be, oh, we'll just point it at the source control repo and forget about it, and it'll just do its thing. That leads to a misunderstanding maybe of what is actually being deployed. In my mind, you need to really integrate with the CI/CD to get the most value and understand what's going on at every step of the process. What do you think, Cody?
Yeah. So speed, I mean, why? Well, it's not why it's important. It's actually where it's important. Speed is important when it's in the context of what I've just done. So like if I'm a painter, and I go and paint a house, like, if all of a sudden there's a smudge on the wall, I would like to use the brush that's still wet to clean up that smudge, and so I don't want to give, this like wall that I've just painted the opportunity to dry, and I put away all my tools and they're out in the garage, and oh shoot, there's the smudge, and I got to go get all that stuff back out. And, so that is what managing the backlog is. Like all this stuff is already dried. It could have been in the production application for years at this point, and all of a sudden you've got something to address. Now, speed is not necessarily important, there to find it. You've found it, it's stale, it's gonna be there for a while. So speed is important when it's in the context of the work that I'm doing. So apart from managing my backlog, I just want instantaneous feedback on the code that I'm writing, whether that's in my IDE, just like IntelliSense, it underlines like, hey, you missed a semicolon. Like, that's important information to know right now. So that can then be addressed, like in real time. You can learn from it in real time. But the last thing I'm going to do as a developer is, I've got a ticket which I'm going to check in my, new code against, and I'm adding, I don't know, calendar control to a website, and then a scanner finds all this ancillary, like, okay, let's say there's SQL injection 1,000 times over in that page. The last thing I'm going to do with my boss's, functional requirement ticket thing, add a calendar control, is like, oh yeah, and I changed every way the app connects to a database. And like, good luck QA, write some new test cases that you didn't plan on. Like, that doesn't happen. I fix only my code, and I'm in and out. Everything else needs to hit the backlog.
Great. So how can tools help along developers in the application security process? What should you be looking for in a tool to support developers? And how do you know what you're looking for is actually what's going to bring value to the business?
So I think really the biggest strength of tooling is consistency, and kind of automating the things where there are manual handoffs or just manual things that the developer has to do. Especially the whole CI/CD pipeline and getting that fully automated. So, once the developer checks in code, all of those handoffs and all the way through to potentially even delivery into production is automated. You can certainly have gates along the process, human approvals and things like that, but eliminating any potential for mistakes. I've seen too many customers that rely on one person on the team to like build the package of what they're going to deploy and manually upload it for a scan, and invariably there are just things that are missed. And I think giving everybody the ability to see those results, at least everybody who's on that team and authorized to see them, is important. I've seen customers that they want to insulate their developers from seeing the results in the IDE directly, or they want them to work through Jira or PDFs and things like that. So I mean, that just removes the developers one level from the remediation advice that might be given by the tool, or any specifics that the tool will also show them to help them remediate their code. So it's important to have them exposed to that as well.
Great. And I like that you mentioned automation. I think sometimes vendors get a little carried away with the automation aspect that their tool can actually deliver. So Cody, I'm interested if you want to take this. What can you actually automate, and what should remain manual when it comes to security?
Yeah, so I mean, there is very easily definable, list of common weaknesses that computers are absolutely great at solving, and they're always going to be better than humans. Things like cross-site scripting, SQL injection, just static analysis is the best tool for the job. Dynamic analysis, it's not as good at finding those two particular flaws. In case anybody needs, the definition there, dynamic analysis is like going to the doctor's office and they poke you and say, where does it hurt? So it's symptoms, but not necessarily the root problem. It interacts with the runtime environment of a website. And it might find something like a cross-site scripting vulnerability, but it's never going to say like, the root cause. And so static analysis, for that type of problem, is going to be more like an MRI. And then it's going to say, here's exactly the root problem. And guess what? All these, symptoms are tied to that root problem. So then things that a human pretty much needs to always do are, business logic. Like you actually have to think about the intended, functionality of an application, and is there any, adverse, things that an attacker could do? Like, could you masquerade as another user? Could you type in a different account number and be seeing somebody else's, information? So anywhere that you've put, something like authentication and authorization, you have to also think about the negative of that, and like, where have I possibly not added authentication and authorization? For one quick example is like, let's say you have authorization, to see a certain, set of menus, and the menus all link to, certain pages. But if somebody doesn't check that you're authorized to visit a page, you could just type in, admin.aspx, and it doesn't matter that you didn't have the permission to see it in your menu. Suddenly you can visit it directly. So you just got to remind yourself, like, or just continuously ask, like, hey, is this a good opportunity to check authorization again? Because it's not going to cost that much. And so adding in that additional check can just make the application more and more bulletproof. But you have to think about those business logic type of problems, and make sure that you consider in your requirements list not only what it should do, like transfer funds, but what it shouldn't do, which is like transfer funds to me. Yeah.
Great. One part of all of this that I find interesting is once everyone started to get on board that security, was a problem, and this is something that needs to be addressed, we said, let's all move security left now. So everyone moved security left, and then we forgot to add security back and right. So then we went back and right. So do you guys have any best practices? How do you make sure that security is both left and right, and in the entire conversation of the software delivery lifecycle?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched on it a little bit earlier, but I like to try to introduce security in the middle first to get that initial baseline, and then start moving left and right with small incremental changes, and then start tracking metrics of, for each thing that you're going to introduce into the process. Before you do that, try to identify the metrics that you're going to use to gauge its success, to see if it even has a measurable impact. Otherwise, you could be just taking up more time for something that isn't going to help. For example, if you are going to shift into the IDE, look at the flaw introduction rate. So for a particular check-in, were there new flaws that were introduced over X period of time, in this project, and do you see that rate go down over time, after you introduce the tool? If you don't see it go down, maybe the tool isn't really being very effective for you, or maybe you're just not collecting the right metrics, and that's potentially where user interviews with the developers might help to see, if it's really helping them at all, if it's identifying, risks at all. You know, and as far as the shift right, the same thing goes. You know, are you scanning your containers before they're deployed? Are you doing the dynamic scanning that Cody mentioned earlier? And are you finding things? You know, are you finding real risks later on in the process to justify spending the money on the tool?
Yeah. Um, the like so I mean I think about the history of like where application security originated from, and it all was manual penetration testing before any tool was even available. And what would happen is you'd go through 12-month waterfall cycles or whatever, and security would come in at the very end and do this 1 week test, which is probably not enough, to get the job done. But there was no planning. I mean, like the plan was to go to production as soon as security was done. They're the last ones in, like then let's go. And you're never actually leaving time for what the security work would be. And so people end up signing off on the risk and like nothing gets done. But the point really being that your developers are going to start asking for, can we get it sooner? Because that was too late. And so dynamic analysis came along, and yeah, you could run it once a week or whatever, but still they were asking like, well, that's already in production, it's been there for 3 years, can we get it sooner? Static analysis comes along, you can run it a lot more frequently and get insights into your code. And so really it's, can this be planned work? Like if I had a security insight every single day that I came into the office, then I can actually plan what my backlog looks like, plan what kind of time I have to spend on things, versus it's sprung upon me at the last moment, and I didn't plan to do anything about it. So I would say, whenever your developers, or if you are a developer on this webinar and, you're saying like, well, I get that information too late, then it is time to start saying like, can I get it sooner? And yes, you want that final, like go, no go, type of notification when you shift right. But you also should be enabled to make security part of a day-to-day, so that it's not something that like a surprise, like you've got something to do here and you don't have time to do it. So that's kind of where I'm at with that one.
Right. So how can developers, also build a relationship with the security team now that developers are taking more of an active role and interest in security? What really is their role in the security aspect, and where do the security researchers or the security team and the security champion come in?
Honestly, I think they're the ones that are ultimately responsible, since they're having to do the work, for security. I think that in many cases, the security team doesn't even necessarily understand what they need. And I think, certainly as the security team starts to feel downward pressure from the board, the CISO, whatever, to produce more secure applications, if the development teams catch wind of, oh, hey, they're gonna make us use some tools, to achieve those goals, get involved sooner rather than later. Start to foster that relationship. I can't tell you how many times in a sales cycle I've been involved with the security team asking for developer interaction, only to find out that the developers are not going to be involved in the process. Sometimes it's just the time that the development team doesn't have, but in some cases it's the security team wanting to insulate them and that's just not productive for anybody. So, you know, it's a relationship issue that they have to work on for sure. You know, and staying plugged in with the security team.
Yeah. I mean, getting the developers excited about security. I mean, I always was excited about security, so you know that's what I kind of wanted for everybody. And maybe it's not for everybody, but I can remember this one time that a developer was like, "Get off my back," you know, like don't even talk to me, I'm busy. And I exploited his application with you know a vulnerability that I had knowledge of. You know, basically sent him a IM with a URL in it, and he clicked it, and it incubated JavaScript that was targeted to his domain that his app was running on, which gave me administrator rights to his app, and then he was like, I'm locked out. I'm like, yep, I did that. And he was like, that's the coolest thing ever. Like, I would like to know how you did that and why you did that and why it's a problem in the application. And then that person said like, hey, the executives are coming to our next, sprint review meeting. And it would be a great time to like demo that and show them why security is important. I'm like, my work here is done.
Yeah. I'll leave us with a short story here too. One of our customers, Cody, actually did a security fair, and they had different members of the security team sign up to actually do like super quick demo on how to exploit SQL injection and cross-site scripting, and they had a lock picking table and physical security obstacle course and other things like that, just to get people excited in all the different areas of security. And it was just totally a not only a team building thing, but just ended up translating into security interest overall, not just from the developers, but for management too.
Yeah.
Great. I know we're running towards the end of our time. So before we go, I just wanted to quickly throw it back to you guys for any last minute thoughts or key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with today. So I'll start with you, Cody.
It's just, development is great. I mean, you're being super creative, and oftentimes you don't want to slow down that creativity. So, help your organizations, pick tools that will make security easier on you, without really slowing down like the pace of innovation, because they're going to keep pushing you towards revenue enhancing everything, and you can actually produce secure code as a byproduct of just normal software development without introducing a lot of extra work or extra burden.
Yeah, and I would say follow the ways of DevOps. Prototype the interaction with the new security tools, start small, establish your own best practice, because everybody's is going to be a little different, and you're not going to follow the vendor cookie cutters necessarily. Come up with as many templates as you can as a part of that prototyping, so that you can say, well, here's how it works for us, and then deploy that at scale later on. Track the metrics as you go, and realize that no vendor tool that you pick up is going to be 100% perfect out of the gate. There are going to be things that need to be tuned, and you will have to refine your process as you go. So, don't be afraid to make mistakes and figure out what works for you. I mean, that's the whole point of DevOps, I think.
Perfect. Well, thank you guys again for such a great conversation. That was Cody Bertram and Patrick McNeil, Senior Principal Solution Architects at Veracode. I'd also like to thank Veracode for sponsoring today's event, as well as the attendees for joining us today. For more information or to sign up for a live demo, you can visit the Veracode website at www.veracode.com. Until next time, I'm Christina Cardoza.
Thank you, everyone.